On May 6, 2013, a 911 call shattered the quiet of a working-class neighborhood in Cleveland, Ohio. To the dispatcher, the name Amanda Berry sounded familiar, like a ghost story from a decade ago. Amanda Berry had vanished on the eve of her 17th birthday in 2003. She was presumed dead. Her mother had died searching for her, but the voice on the phone was real, and she wasn't alone. When police arrived at 2207 Seymour Avenue, they expected to find one survivor. Instead, they found a house of horrors that had been operating in plain sight for 11 years. Inside the darkened rooms, bound by chains and fear, were 3 women: Amanda Berry, Gina DeJesus, and Michelle Knight. They had been taken separately. They had been erased from the world, but they had survived. This is the true story of the Cleveland Three, a case of unimaginable darkness and the blinding light of a rescue that the world called a miracle. To understand the miracle of the rescue, we must first understand the silence that preceded it. The story begins in the early 2000s on the west side of Cleveland, Ohio. It was a tight-knit community, largely Puerto Rican, where families sat on porches and neighbors looked out for one another. But between 2002 and 2004, a shadow fell over the neighborhood. The first disappearance. Michelle Knight. August 23, 2002. Michelle Knight was 21 years old. Unlike the victims who would follow, Michelle was an adult, a young mother fighting a custody battle for her son. On the day she vanished, she was scheduled to appear in court. She was stressed, vulnerable, and trying to navigate the city on her own. She was last seen leaving a cousin's house. She accepted a ride from an acquaintance, a man she knew vaguely as the father of a schoolmate. His name was Ariel Castro. When Michelle didn't show up for court, the system failed her. Police and social workers assumed she had run away, overwhelmed by her legal troubles. Her name was removed from the NCIC missing persons database after just 15 months. While her family worried, the world moved on. Michelle Knight became the forgotten victim. The second disappearance. Amanda Berry, 8 months later. April 21, 2003. Amanda Berry was 16 years old, a bright, popular student who worked at a local Burger King. It was the day before her 17th birthday. She finished her shift at 7 p.m., still wearing her uniform, eager to get home for a birthday party her family was planning. She called her sister to say she was catching a ride home. She never arrived. The police response for Amanda was immediate. The FBI got involved. Her mother, Luana Miller, became a fixture on local news, pleading for her daughter's return. But despite the attention, the leads went nowhere. The third disappearance, Gina DeJesus. April 2, 2004. Almost a year after Amanda vanished. Gina DeJesus was just 14. She was walking home from middle school with a friend. The friend parted ways with her to get on a bus. But Gina continued walking alone. A man pulled up in a car. He asked for directions. He told her he was the father of her friend, Arlene. Gina recognized him. She trusted him. She got into the car. Within a 2-year span, 3 young women had vanished within a few miles of each other. The community was gripped by fear. Parents stopped letting their children play outside. Rumors of human trafficking rings swirled, but the truth was far simpler and far more terrifying. The girls hadn't been taken across the country. They hadn't been trafficked overseas. They were just a few miles away. While the police dragged rivers and chased leads in other states, the man responsible was eating dinner at local restaurants, playing bass guitar and salsa bands, and driving a school bus for the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Ariel Castro was 42 years old when the kidnappings began. To the outside world, he was a bit of an oddball, perhaps having a temper, but hardly a criminal mastermind. He lived at 2207 Seymour Avenue, a 2-story white house with a detached garage. Neighbors would later recall strange things about the house. Castro kept the windows boarded up or covered with heavy blankets, even in the stifling heat of summer. He played music at ear-splitting volumes. He was obsessive about locking his doors, installing double and triple deadbolts on the front entrance. But no one called the police. In a neighborhood where people minded their own business, Ariel Castro was just the guy on the corner. The irony was painful. Castro was not just hiding, he was participating in the search for his own victims. He attended vigils for Gina DeJesus. He comforted Gina's mother. He even played music at a fundraiser held to keep the girls' names in the news. He watched the families weep, knowing exactly where their daughters were. Inside 2207 Seymour Avenue. However, the reality was a nightmare that defies description. The house was constructed like a prison. Castro had modified the layout to create soundproof torture chambers. The women were kept in the basement at first, chained to poles, forced to use plastic toilets. Later, they were moved to upstairs bedrooms, but the chains remained. For the first few years, the women did not know the others were there. They were kept in isolation, terrified, abused, and told that their families had stopped looking for them. Castro used psychological warfare to break their spirits. He would show them news reports of the search efforts, then turn off the TV and tell them no one is coming. Years turned into a decade. Outside, the seasons changed. Presidents were elected. Technology advanced. Amanda, Gina, and Michelle missed it all. They lived in a timeless void of fear. But inside the darkness, a unique bond began to form. Eventually, Castro allowed the women to interact. They became a makeshift family, relying on each other for survival. Michelle, the oldest, often took the brunt of Castro's physical abuse to protect the younger girls. On Christmas Day, 2006, the dynamic in the house changed forever. Amanda Berry, alone in a plastic kiddie pool in a filthy bedroom, gave birth to a baby girl. The baby was Castro's daughter. But her birth was not attended by doctors or nurses. It was attended by Michelle Knight. Castro had threatened Michelle, "If that baby dies, I will kill you." The baby was born not breathing. Michelle, starved and weak, performed CPR on the newborn, breathing life into her lungs until the infant cried. Amanda named her daughter Jocelyn. Jocelyn became the light in their hell. As she grew, Castro treated her differently. He saw her as his child. He allowed her occasionally to go into the backyard behind high fences. He bought her toys. For Amanda, Gina, and Michelle, Jocelyn was the reason to stay alive. They taught her to read and write. They created a semblance of a school in the attic. They shielded her from the worst of the reality, trying to give her a childhood within the walls of a prison. By 2013, Jocelyn was 6 years old. She was bright, curious, and beginning to ask questions. "Where is Grandma? Why can't we go out the front door?" Castro was becoming careless. He was becoming comfortable. He believed he had broken the women so thoroughly that they would never try to escape. He would even leave the house for short periods, trusting the locks and the fear he had instilled. May 6th, 2013. A Monday. Ariel Castro left the house in the late afternoon. He was going to a fast food restaurant. In his haste, or perhaps in his arrogance, he made a fatal mistake. He left the inner door unlocked. The outer storm door was bolted, but the heavy interior door was not secured. Amanda Berry heard him leave. She waited. She checked the door. It opened, but the storm door was locked tight. She couldn't force it. She didn't have a key. Panic set in. She knew if he returned and found her at the door, the consequences would be severe. But she also looked at her 6-year-old daughter. She knew this might be their only chance. She began to scream. Charles Ramsey, a neighbor who lived nearby, was eating a Big Mac on his porch. He heard the screaming. He looked over at the White House, the house that was always quiet. He saw a hand waving through the bottom panel of the storm door. He ran over. "I saw this girl going nuts trying to get out," Ramsey later told reporters. "She said, 'Help me, I've been kidnapped. I've been in here a long time.'" The door wouldn't open. The bottom panel was aluminum. Ramsey, joined by another neighbor, Angel Cordero, kicked at the bottom of the door. The metal bent. The hole was small, barely big enough for a person. Amanda Berry didn't hesitate. She pushed her 6-year-old daughter Jocelyn through the hole first. Then, she squeezed herself through. For the first time in 10 years, Amanda Berry stood on the grass. She was wearing mismatched clothes and old slide sandals. She grabbed her daughter's hand and ran. Not to her home, not to a police station. She ran across the street to a neighbor's house and asked to use the phone. With trembling fingers, she dialed 911. The police arrived within minutes. Officer Anthony Espada was one of the first on the scene. When he pulled up, Amanda Berry jumped into the safety of his cruiser. She was frantic. She grabbed the officer's arm and said 3 words that changed the scope of the entire operation. "There are others." She told them about the women upstairs. Officers approached the house cautiously, guns drawn. They didn't know if Castro was inside. They kicked in the main door and began to clear the rooms. The officers moved up the dark, narrow staircase. "Police!" they shouted. "Is anyone here?" From the shadows of the hallway, a small, frail figure emerged. It was Gina DeJesus. Then came Michelle Knight. The women were terrified. They threw themselves into the arms of the officers. One officer, choking back tears, radioed dispatch. "We found them. We found them all." News helicopters were already circling overhead. The images were beamed live across the world. Crowds gathered on Seymour Avenue. Cheers erupted as the ambulances pulled away. At the hospital, the reunions were heartbreaking. Gina DeJesus' mother, Nancy, who had never changed her phone number, rushed to the emergency room. Amanda Berry's sister collapsed in relief. Tragically, Amanda's mother had passed away from heart failure in 2006, never knowing her daughter was alive. But amidst the joy, there was a darker reality. The doctors who examined the women cataloged a decade of torture, malnutrition, hearing loss from beatings, and the psychological scars of prolonged captivity. Michelle Knight, the forgotten victim, required the most intensive care. She had been the punching bag, suffering severe facial reconstruction needs. While the women were being treated, the hunt for Ariel Castro was brief. He was arrested at a nearby McDonald's. When police approached him, he didn't fight. He simply asked, "How did you find them?" The investigation into 2207 Seymour Avenue revealed a house of horrors. Police found chains, 99 feet of heavy-duty chain, locks, and a suicide note written by Castro years earlier, where he blamed his victims for his own depravity. The legal process moved swiftly. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty, citing the forced miscarriages Castro had induced in Michelle Knight as aggravated murder. To avoid execution, Castro accepted a plea deal. On August 1st, 2013, he pleaded guilty to 937 criminal counts, including kidnapping, rape, and aggravated murder. At his sentencing, Michelle Knight, the woman he had tried to break the most, stood before him. She was small, standing barely 5 feet tall, but her voice filled the courtroom. She looked her captor in the eye and said, "I spent 11 years in hell. Now your hell is just beginning. I will overcome all this that has happened, but you will face hell for eternity." Castro was sentenced to life in prison plus 1,000 years without the possibility of parole. The house on Seymour Avenue was not allowed to stand as a monument to his crimes. Within days of the sentencing, it was demolished. The crowds cheered as the excavator claw tore through the roof. 1 month into his life sentence, on September 3, 2013, Ariel Castro was found dead in his cell. He had hanged himself with a bedsheet. The cowardice that defined his life defined his end. The story of the Cleveland abductions is not a story about Ariel Castro. It is a story about Amanda, Gina, and Michelle. It is a story about the unbreakable will to survive. In the years since their freedom, the women have reclaimed their lives. Amanda Berry became a news advocate, working for a local TV station helping to find other missing people. Gina DeJesus founded a center to support families of the abducted. Michelle Knight changed her name to Lily Rose Lee, wrote 2 best-selling books, got married, and found the happiness she was denied for so long. And Jocelyn, the child born in captivity. She is growing up free, surrounded by a family that adores her, a living testament to the fact that light can indeed come from the deepest darkness. The house on Seymour Avenue is gone. It is now a garden, but the lesson remains. When we hear about missing children, we often assume the worst. We assume that time erases hope. But somewhere, right now, someone is waiting. Someone is listening for a key in a lock. Someone is hoping for a miracle. And as Amanda Berry proved on that May afternoon, sometimes all it takes is a single moment of courage to kick down the door. Thank you for watching. And if you liked the story, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel because the next story is on the way.